Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Lake Orion Sports Update. I'm Kevin McCormick. We are going to be bringing you the latest news in hockey, basketball, and more, all coming up right now. The Lake Orion varsity hockey team began the second half of their season with an away game against Rochester United on January 6th. In the first period, each team scored a goal. Matthew Carana scored for Rochester United with help from Jack Myers and Caden Ebinger. Lake Orion's Lucas Barber was able to take advantage of a power play at the 6-minute 12-second mark. He was assisted by Jacob Helzer and Connor Graham. Scoring ramped up in the second as Rochester pulled ahead when Drew Stimpian earned himself an even strength goal with 8 minutes remaining in the period. The Dragons had a quick retaliation. Connor Graham was able to get the puck to Gabe Podick, and he tied the game at 2. A couple of minutes later, TJ Hirschfield single-handedly shot a power play goal, giving Lake Orion a 3-2 lead going into the final period. The Dragons tried to keep the momentum going when Lucas Barber scored another power play goal with a little help from line mates Connor Graham and Gabe Podick. With the Dragons up 4-2, Rochester United began putting more pressure on the Lake Orion defense. At 13:37 in the third, Rochester's Mitchell Shell successfully got the puck past Reed Marshall for their third goal of the night. The 1-point difference was enough for motivation for Rochester United. With less than 7 minutes to go, Matthew Canaris scored his second goal of the night, tying the game at 4. He was assisted by Nick Manzios. Neither team was able to score again, and that game ended in a 4-4 tie. On January 12th, the Dragons traveled to Patterson Ice Arena for an away game against the East Grand Rapids Pioneers. Lake Orion fell behind by a point during the first period of game action. The Pioneers were able to score 2 goals, while the Dragons were only able to muster up 1. But Lake Orion started heating up in the second, scoring 3 goals and holding East Grand Rapids to 1. Cade Manzo, Connor Graham, and Gabe Podick were the scorers for the Dragons and helped put Lake Orion into a 4-3 lead. Lake Orion kept the pressure on as the Pioneers once again outscored them 3-1, allowing the Dragons to take the win 7-4. Mitchell Burney and TJ Hirschfield added their names to the score sheet, and Connor Graham got his second goal of the night. Just one day after their winning game against the Pioneers, Lake Orion had an away game against the Grand Rapids Catholic Central Cougars. The Dragons got off to a sluggish start in the first, giving up 3 goals to the Cougars while they remained scoreless. The Dragons didn't make their way on the board until late in the second period when Gabe Podick capitalized on a power play, making the score 3-1 going into the third. Lake Orion tried to shrink the gap in the score with a goal by Jacob Helzer, but the Cougars scored 2 additional goals, taking the win with a final score of 5-2. The loss dropped Lake Orion down to 4th in the OAA Red Division with 9 points, an OAA record of 4-1, and overall 9-4-1. Stony Creek is sitting on top of the OAA Red with 12 points. Just below in second is Troy, also with 12, but a 6-1 OAA record. Rochester United pulled ahead of Lake Orion into the third-place slot with 10 points, and they have a 4-2 OAA record. The girls' varsity basketball team continued their season after the winter break with an away game against Rochester Adams on January 4th. It was a relatively close score, but unfortunately for the Lady Dragons, the Highlanders ultimately took the win by 54-44. The Lady Dragons were on the road again on January 9th for an away game against the Davison Cardinals. Sadly, this game ended in a similar manner to their previous game, and the Dragons lost 34-26. Let's check in with the boys varsity basketball team. On January 3rd, Lake Orion held a home game against the Farmington Falcons in the Lake Orion Fieldhouse. The Dragons started off with a strong lead and never looked back. In the first half, the Dragons were ahead of the Falcons 44-27. Lake Orion kept the lead going into the second half, scoring 26 points and keeping Farmington at 24. The solid gameplay from Lake Orion resulted in a 70-51 victory. The whole team was working well together, with 11 of the 14 players contributing to the final score. Senior Jamie Lewis led the way with 22 points, and he was followed by junior teammate Nate Talbot. The following Friday, the Dragons traveled to Pontiac High School for an away game. Lake Orion began the first half of the game with a strong offense, outscoring Pontiac by 18, setting them up for a successful second half. Lake Orion kept on the scoring in the third quarter, but their defense started to waver slightly as they poured in 20 more points. But Pontiac scored 17. Pontiac rallied in the fourth quarter of the game, and they outscored the Dragons by 10 points. But ultimately, it was not enough, and Lake Orion took the win with a final score of 68-57. This victory was Lake Orion's fourth consecutive win over the past couple of weeks. Lewis once again was the leading scorer for the Dragons with a strong 30-point output, and that tied his career high. The January 12th away game against Rochester was a crucial one for the Dragons. Lake Orion had a rocky start in the first half. At one point, the Dragons found themselves behind by 14 points. Lake Orion was able to regain some control by the end of the first quarter, and they cut that deficit down to 7, and by halftime the game was tied. The Dragons continued their offensive push in the third quarter, gaining a 1-point lead. The final quarter, the fourth quarter, is when things really started to go wrong for Lake Orion. Several Dragon fouls and difficulty taking advantage from the free throw line pushed the score in the Falcons' favor, and they defeated Lake Orion 60-50. Lake Orion's overall record, however, is 6-2 this season, and they have a 2-1 OAA Blue record. The boys varsity swimming team found success this past week with a home meet against Bloomfield Hills. After coming in first in several of the events, Lake Orion won the meet 116-70. Alex Brent took first place in the 1-meter diving with a score of 270.60. Other top Dragon swimmers included Daniel Reimchen, Zahir Salem, Evan Lundquist, and Robert Cordless. So that wraps up this episode of the Lake Orion Sports Update. Make sure you tune in next time for more winter sports coverage. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you the next time.